Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Je vous remercie de votre présence aujourd'hui. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you virtually from beautiful Hamilton, which is on the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. As we come together today, let's renew our commitment as Ontarians and Canadians to honoring the treaties and building strong, equitable partnerships with Indigenous peoples, based on respect, cooperation, and action to make people's lives better and build stronger communities across our province. Thanks to all of you at ROMA for having me here yet again. Of course, we're all missing that opportunity to catch up face to face, have those impromptu conversations in hallways and restaurants and elevators. But like all of you, I'm thankful to the organizers, the volunteers, and staff who worked hard to make this innovative virtual event a success. I do also want to just take a moment to thank each and every one of you for your determination and dedication through what you've had to face in this last year. We all know that in rural Ontario, local governments take the blame for decisions made at all levels of government, but ultimately have control over very few of those decisions. You're the first folks that people call, and your faces are the ones they recognize on the streets and in the grocery stores and at the gas stations, even with a mask. I know you got into municipal politics like I did to help your neighbors and to make life better for the families in your community. You have stepped up to the plate at an absolutely crucial time for our communities and for our province. And for that, for your leadership, your service, and your steady hands, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. We're all here today because we share a similar vision for communities in rural Ontario and for our entire province. We envision the end of this pandemic, the end of the illness, the sorrow and the worry, and the chance to get our communities back on track. Ontario is the best place in the world to live, to start a business, to work, and to raise your family. We have some work to do to fulfill that promise. As municipal leaders and critical voices for your communities, you know that our province cannot recover and thrive unless rural Ontario can recover and thrive. From good, dependable jobs in forestry and mining, to the agricultural sector, to Main Street businesses, rural Ontario has given your all during COVID-19. Folks have helped ensure our supply chains stay intact during a global crisis, especially the food supply chain. Businesses have kept as many people on payroll as they could. Municipal leaders have worked hard to maintain essential services, and you've all pitched in to encourage each other to wear masks, to stay home, and to stop the spread. You've done your part. What you deserve, both as vital partners in local government and as Ontarians, is a partner in provincial government that does its part. A government that listens to rural Ontarians, that quickly, transparently, and effectively implements the recommendations of public health officials so we can end this nightmare as soon as possible. And a government that partners with local leaders to make your communities whole again, to make sure the pain that this pandemic is making us feel today isn't compounded by the damage of cuts tomorrow. Even before the pandemic, rural Ontarians had been seeing their lives get less and less affordable for decades. Pre-pandemic cuts and downloads by Mr. Ford, and decades of cuts and downloads by previous Liberal governments and Conservative governments before that have been making it harder and harder for municipalities to be financially resilient. Many of you were struggling to maintain essential services before COVID-19 hit, from long-term care and public health to water treatment, EMS, housing, and childcare. I believe that right now, you need more help with these services. There have been over 5,400 people lost to this pandemic, including well over 3,200 precious lives lost in our long-term care homes. Hospitals and frontline healthcare staff are under-resourced, they're burnt out, and they're in the process of being overrun. Parents who were terrified to send their kids into school buses and crowded classrooms, poorly ventilated classrooms, are now struggling to juggle work and kids learning at home. Small businesses are forced to go it alone with very little help, and a lot of them haven't made it. Good, hardworking folks have lost their jobs, and some have even lost their homes, compounding an alarming homelessness crisis in too many of our communities, large and small. We need investments in local governments, local services and supports more than ever if we're going to help folks to actually get to the other side of this thing. Ça ne peut plus continuer comme ça. On doit changer les choses. Like all of you, I was hopeful. I was hopeful that the province and the federal government would put their heads together and address the massive $4.1 billion COVID-related shortfall facing municipal budgets, to shore up municipalities, to protect the services. $3 billion in disbursements under the federal-provincial Safe Restart Agreement could have been a good first step, but by withholding the rest of the available funds, Mr. Ford forced municipalities to shoulder more of the burden. You'll recall that in June of 2019, before COVID, Moody's said provincial funding cuts to municipal programs would leave local governments a couple of $1 billion worse off over the next 10 years. So today, Ontario's municipalities are staring down an absolutely untenable $2.4 billion COVID-related shortfall for 2021. Now is not the time for penny pinching. It is not the time to disperse funds in drips and drabs. And it's certainly not the time for Mr. Ford to keep sitting on billions in COVID-related funding. It's time to invest in Ontario, time to invest in the health of our rural municipalities and the services that families count on. As leader of the official opposition, I love working shoulder to shoulder with municipal leaders, health experts, and everyday Ontarians, even when it's all via Zoom. Together, we're supporting what's right, keeping pressure on this government to fix what's wrong, and laying out solutions of our own. That's why from the earliest days of the pandemic, I've called for the province to provide emergency operational funding for municipalities, including funding 100% of public health costs. I'm going to keep fighting for that. I worked closely with small business owners, business advocates, and working people since last April to push for our plan to save main streets in rural communities and across Ontario. That's a plan that will help small and medium-sized businesses get through this by banning commercial evictions, providing commercial rent subsidies, helping businesses with safe operational and remote work setup costs, and other supports so that businesses can keep workers on the payroll and keep their bills paid. New Democrats have called for the province to invest heavily in rural and northern infrastructure, especially broadband. We're pretty tired of governments that announce that they're going to do something about broadband, but then leave the funding sitting in the bank. Broadband is literally more important than ever when it comes to keeping businesses in your communities kicking and giving your kids and grandkids the chance to keep their education going. And throughout both waves of the horrifying crisis in long-term care, New Democrats have joined healthcare workers and experts in calling for ramped up funding to support homes in crisis, hiring thousands of PSWs and infection control experts. And when all is said and done, fixing long-term care for good so that this never ever could happen again. And since day one of the pandemic, New Democrats have been proud to stand alongside local leaders in fighting for universal paid sick days for workers, because people should be able to stop the spread by staying home when they're sick, without fear of losing a day's pay. COVID-19 has shown us all that we are a community, even when we're apart, that we rise and fall together. If families in rural Ontario and communities across the province are going to make it through COVID-19, and if we're all going to bounce back in the weeks and months ahead, then partnering with, supporting, and investing in municipal governments has to happen. As we push forward through the dark days of the pandemic and into the brighter days ahead, know that you can count on New Democrats to keep standing with you and the folks you work tirelessly to represent. We've got your back, both as a partner and as a vital order of government that Ontarians depend on, which is why we will never support downloading more responsibilities and costs onto you. And we will always fight to protect your decision-making powers, taking pressures off your budgets, and ensure that the province takes on its fair share so that folks can continue to count on you and the services that you provide. Together, we will make it through this pandemic, and we will build a recovery based on our shared vision, making Ontario the best place in the world to build a great life, raise a great family, and start a great business that'll last for generations. Thank you so very much. Merci beaucoup. Miigwech.